Now, Johanna.
Okay. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I wanted to say I was a little bit worried because, as we know, the World Cup has started today. So I was worried that nobody would be here. And there's actually quite a big audience. And in 2006, I moderated a panel right here at the Convention Center as part of the World Cancer Congress. And in the audience, there was exactly one person because it was the final of the World Cup. So the one person in the audience was the wife of one of the panelists. And it was the game, if you'll recall, where Zidane had butted somebody. So it was a very it was a great game. And I was even thinking, could I leave and go watch the game? Thought that might be inappropriate. But thank you. I'm really glad that it's frankly, Sweden's not playing yet, so it's really not worth watching yet. Once that happens, then I'll understand if you need to get up and go. So thanks very much, and I really appreciate being here. I want to also thank Joe Buford, who is one of the people that I have, who invited me here and who I had the privilege of working for many, many years ago. And it's a pleasure as our paths reconverge here. So thanks so much to you. So I appreciate so much what Amanda just said, and I think it was tremendously helpful. I think I'll come at it from a slightly different angle, which is for NCDs, the transition. How do you transition from no funding? I mean, there hasn't been funding. So as we've heard these numbers, from Center for Global Development, from Rachel Nugent and Amanda, 1% of development assistance for health at best, maybe somewhere around 2%. In a good year have gone to non-communicable diseases, which cause somewhere in the ballpark of 70 or more % of all deaths each year. There's some other variables. It's not a complete apples to apples, but it's a really important gap that we've been struggling with. And I think even Rachel has more recent numbers about if you map it out against DALYs, I think it's $1 per DALY for NCDs versus 30, 50, 300 for some of the other health issues. So there's obviously been a gap, and that gap I think helped actually create something which was positive, which was actually cancer, cardiovascular, diabetes, chronic respiratory coming together and saying, look, we share risk factors around tobacco, unhealthy diet, all these other elements, but also we share this other risk factor of being under-prioritized, under-recognized, as problems of low and middle as well as high-income countries. And so that sort of fifth risk factor, if you will, I think helped kind of foster this notion of partnership, of putting away some of our short-term interests for longer-term mutual benefit. And helped foster the NCD movement and the NCD environment. So I think that's a very important piece, not to paint too rosy a picture, but to say, through this we now have an NCD community. There are debates about the name. I don't want to go into those debates. I think we have this term, and I think we understand what it means. And I think now the transition is one to national action in low and middle income countries in particular. But also, I think the transition, there's a couple of questions I guess I would ask you to consider as I'm speaking, and I'll try to keep it succinct, around who actually is the customer. And I think that's an important question that I appreciated that we heard before. Who are going to be who's the seller, who's the buyer, as we move forward in this, and then do we have the right narrative for this, which I think has been a bit of an inhibition. Peter Sands and others yesterday spoke about there is no magic bullet. I would say probably the single magic bullet is multi-sectoral action. Problem with multi-sectoral is it's a term that we understand that hasn't sort of made the leap into, we haven't found a way of sort of making that a more publicly understood concept and then implemented into national action strategies, particularly in non-health areas. So I think those are some considerations. But if we go to what I think is actually a really exciting bit of news, we finally, after a long time, have, I think, a very good investment case, and have for lower middle income countries and low income countries, come up with a good sort of return on investment case. And I'm just going to commend this to you: Saving Lives, Spending Less. This was just launched at the World Health Assembly. I had a very tiny role in providing some input into it, but it was mainly WHO and supported by Bloomberg, helped to sort of crunch some numbers and say, well, we've got these, what they call the best buys for NCDs. these 16 best buys based on a set of targets that were supported and adopted in 2013 that get at what are those areas that we can intervene that have the highest return on investment. And some sit in, so there's some that's really in treatment, but a lot that's actually outside of treatment, areas like physical activity. Tax plays a huge role, and now there's this move towards this concept called Stax, which I love because my parents used to listen to Stax records when I was a kid, but it means sugar, tobacco, and alcohol tax. If we think of just Stax as an imperfect but really kind of understandable and integrated approach, we can start to understand how excise, as well as to some extent sales taxes on these products, can be, as my dear friend Sir George Aline calls, a win-win-win. Not sin taxes. We don't call them sin taxes. We call them win-win-win, where we can sort of reduce demand, reduce consumption around these products, and also generate some revenue for governments. So those areas, and an integrated approach to that is something that we really want to see at this UN high-level meeting on NCDs, which takes place, as mentioned, on September 27th. So the other areas in this document, they speak to cervical cancer, which is a low-hanging fruit, particularly with visual inspection with acetic acid. We really have a great, wonderful opportunity to have some low-cost screening and even treatment. Physical activity, tobacco, and cardiovascular medicines, cardiovascular being the leading cause of death in the world, and one for which we have the lion's share of evidence for what works, and we have the products for what works. They just haven't made their way into the to that sort of procurement process that Amanda was describing. So there are other domains of financing that are important in terms of innovative financing, tax, of course, as I mentioned, catalytic funding. So I think that's an area that we're all looking at. +1 funding, integrated funding into existing programs, but potentially even going more broadly outside of health, what we in World Obesity Federation called triple wins, where you can win around in urbanization, climate change, and the health issues, and then sort of those non-healthcare health sort of points that I mentioned before. It was interesting, there was a bridge that in Scotland that came in well under budget, and everybody was really excited about it. And the way that they saved all that money was they did away with sidewalks. It's why I talk about this, because I think it's really important. As World Bank gives loans for roads in low and middle income countries, are they thinking about, can people actually walk on those roads? First time I tried to go running in Dubai, I almost got killed. There's no sidewalks in many places around the world. So I think we don't understand how much that's had an impact on our lives, and why 4 million people per year die of sort of obesity-related causes as a result of sort of all these factors coming together: lack of physical activity, changes to diet, commodification of food in ways that have not been positive for the lion's share of the world, as well as some epigenetic factors. So again, just to sort of come to an end around this, I think we need to see how this integrates into UHC. NCDs have a tremendous opportunity to be integrated into universal health coverage. It's a great. I'm excited by the new global program of work of WHO with the $3 billion, and I think that sort of billion on UHC is even more important than the sort of the billion leading healthier and lives, as well as, of course, the billion in health emergencies. So I think, again, we need to now move into a space where we're transitioning to creating kind of an integrated demand that does require multisectoral action. Multisectoral action is very hard to describe, but I think the place where we can describe it and the force that we've yet to harness is those living with NCDs and other health issues, because people are not silos. They are people. They have communicable and non-communicable diseases. I've been more public lately. I talk about it. I have 2 NCDs I've lived with for 27 years. I'm a 27-year cancer survivor living with MS. I understand multisectoral in my day-to-day life. I understand what that means. I hope I can maybe take some of that knowledge that I have and get my head around what might make sense for a wider public, for others affected by it. And I can promise you every single person in this room has been affected by NCDs. So how do we harness our collective experience and action and in a way get out of talking at each other in acronyms and start to talk to each other as humans and say, how can we bring this all together? Thanks.